Alright, welcome back. So what we're going to do this time is we're going to start making use of the fact that we're in a navigation controller and doing some drill down things, right? So this will be kind of fun because it's actually the first time in this class we've shown another view controller. We've actually been single view, which is crazy because we got to start using more than one view. And it's actually really easy to do with segues and storyboards now. It just makes it super slick. So we're going to kind of do that for the first time. So what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and create a new file first. So we're going to call it MovieQuoteDetailViewController, and then we're going to start using it in the storyboard. So create the new file first. Right-click on the group, say New File, CocoaTouch Class. It's going to be a UI view controller. Note that it's not a table view controller; it's just a plain old view controller. And I'm going to call it MovieQuoteDetailViewController. So you'll see the word like master and detail. So like the table view was our master, and then this is the detail view. Those are just the words they use. So I called it MovieQuoteDetailViewController because I love long names. So go ahead and save it in the default location, and now you've got that project. If you want to, you can kind of do our cleanup. So no did receive notifications. We're not doing any navigation from here. It's coming to us. And view did load, so I just kind of took it down to the cleanest version to start with. And now we're going to go make in the storyboard a detail view controller. So right now, if you kind of look at it, maybe you have to zoom out a little bit. You can see we've got the nav controller, we've got our master view controller, and we're going to go ahead and add a detail view controller. So I'm just going to take a view controller, I'm going to drop it into the storyboard, which is so big you can't really see, and I'm going to set it next to it. Now the first thing that I want to do is I've got this view controller. I want to actually set it to be the right type, right? So it's not a generic view controller. It is actually a MovieQuoteDetail view controller. And you can see it updated over here on the left, so that made me happy. The next thing I want to do is I want to add a segue. There's a couple different types to do segues. Segue is, launching the next view controller. One way that you could do it is you can make just kind of a segue from one view controller to the other, and these are called manual segues. A manual segue is not what we're going to do here, but I want to mention them because they're really powerful. And it's just a generic segue that goes from here to there that is not automatically called, right? So it's called a manual segue because you have to, in your code, say, like, perform segue, right? And so we could do that. It's just that if we did do that, we would have to listen for the clicks on a row, and then like in that did select, then we would fire the segue, and that would work out fine, but it's not what we're going to do here. What we're going to do here is we're going to actually click on the cell. So I'm on my movie quote cell, and what I want to do from the movie quote cell is I want to right-click drag over to the segue here. Once you click on show, what's going to happen is it's going to actually add a segue. So it actually shows this little arrow between them, and that's a segue. Whenever you click on the segue, it should highlight the cell. If it didn't highlight that cell, that means somehow you didn't set it up right. So because it should highlight that cell. And this type of segue is an automatic segue, right? So whenever you click on this cell, it just fires. So it just all works under the hood, which is really kind of neat how little code you have to add. Another thing that I will recommend is that you go ahead and name your segues. It turns out to not be important this time, but it can be important if you've got a lot of different segues that leave to name them and then reference them in code. So I'm just going to call this the show detail segue. And again, this one was not critical to name, but it's good practice, right? And again, I've made an identifier in the storyboard, so you know what I'm going to do, right? My OCD can't let me not do this. And I'm going to make a constant that says let show detail segue identifier is equal to show detail segue, right? So now I've got a constant that I can reference later. And I think that the segue is now all done. You could actually run this app and it would launch into that view controller. So you click on I'll be back. It shows that detail view. And no surprise, it's completely blank right now. and it doesn't matter who you clicked on right now, but we'll fix those things. So what the detail view is going to show is it's going to show you details about the object in the list. Turns out in this case, I can see everything about these objects here, so it's kind of pointless. Maybe I should have put in a long quote so at least you couldn't see the whole quote, and then in the detail it would show you the whole quote, right? But really it's just that this concept is so powerful, not that we need it here. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start doing some things with this view controller. The nice thing about this is stuff we've done, like this is our bread and butter, right? So we're going to add widgets and constraints and things like that. So what we're going to add is we're going to add a couple labels. So I'm going to put one label that's kind of in the upper left-hand corner that says quote. So like what is the quote? You can see that it's the wrong size, so I'm going to hit Command equals to kind of make it snap to the right size. I am going to use constraints, so I'll snap it to the top and then the left. It says 0, but that's because it's being relative to some margin. So I add those constraints. Once I've got that label done, I'm going to add another label below it. The label below it is going to stretch all the way across, and then it's going to have a height of at least 44 is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to add these constraints. So I'm just going to say top, left, right. Oh, somehow I got 8.5. I'm going to change that to 8. And then I'm going to go ahead and set the height to be 44, but I'm actually going to modify that in just a second. So top, left, right, make that say 8 again, and I'm going to add those 4 constraints. Now the 44, what I actually wanted is I wanted a min of 44. So what I want to say is make it 44 or greater, right? So my goal is if I've got a really long quote that goes many, many lines, I want to stretch to show the whole thing. Speaking of quotes that go many, many lines, I'm going to have to set some things on my label. So I go into my attributes. So my constraints are set. Those are the 4 constraints. You can see them in the notes as well. In my attributes, what I want to do is I want to center this thing up. Instead of saying label, I'll just say, quote goes here. This is where my quote's going to end up. In order to be multiple lines, you need to set lines equal to 0. I know that sounds weird to set it to 0, but 0 is a special number that says use as many lines as you need, right? So if you say 1, you only get 1 line. If you say 2, you only get 2 lines. If you say 0, you get as many as you need. And with the way we're hugging to our content and the way we're a minimum of 44, it should work out nicely to have some very long quotes. You can play with it to your heart's content. Once I've kind of got those 2, I need kind of a replica of those 2, but for the movie. Since it's so similar, I'm going to actually highlight them, hold down Option, and drag it down. That's just a fancy way to do a copy-paste. And then instead of quote, I'm going to say movie. Instead of saying quote goes here, I'm going to say movie goes here. And then I'm going to have to add a couple constraints. Depending on what they got from the copy, I'm going to have to add some more stuff. So you can see that he got his spacing to the thing below it because we copied them together, but he does not have a top or a left. We're not going to set his width or height because we're just going to let him wrap to his contents. And then this guy looks like he actually kept the height greater than 44, so that's great. He kept the spacing to the guy above him, but he does not have the left or right of 0, 0 relative to the margin, right? So whatever the margin is, he's got those. So that looks good enough. We should go in and glance at his properties, but they should be set. So it's centered up, and its lines is equal to 0. Just to share, there's different ways to do centering on multi-lines. We've just kind of done whatever is easiest here, and we're not really worried about it. Another thing you could do, which is fancier, is you could center the label, and then it will kind of line up the left edges. But I'm not worried about that. If you play with it a lot, you can probably fix it. All right, so this is our detail view controller. It's a pretty simple little guy, right? So I'm kind of happy with how he came out. Let's go ahead and make some connections to him so that we can set these labels in code. So I'm just going to go ahead and take this label, right-click, drag over here, and I'm going to say quote label. Note that I went to the actual quote goes here area. And then below that, I'm going to make an outlet connection, so outlet to the movie label. So now I've finished my storyboard stuff. I'm actually ready to start playing with code. So let's go into our detail view controller and let's start doing stuff with these two labels. So what I would like to do with these two labels is I would like to update the text based on a movie. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the master pass us in a movie quote, and then we're going to set it. So in order to get past a movie quote, I'm going to have a property for it. So I'll just say movie quote, and I'll just say that it's going to be of type movie quote optional, because it might be nil, because it's nil until they set it. So here an optional is the right thing to do. And then there's a bunch of ways to do this, but I'm actually just going to say view will appear. And so what I want to do in view will appear, well, first I'm going to call my super, because that's just good practice. Turns out super doesn't do anything, but it's still good practice. And then I'm going to go ahead and set up those labels based on what movie I've got. So I'm going to take the quote label and set his text to the movie quotes quote. And then I'm going to take the movie label. Oops, I put the wrong thing there. Movie label and make his text be the movie quotes movie. And you can see I like to always let the compiler finish for me. So like I typed, MOVI, and then I hit enter just to let it finish. And it did things like the optional chaining for me. And the optional chaining is nice here because if somehow you don't get a movie quote, so you could actually run it right now and you wouldn't get a movie quote, it will silently do nothing instead of crashing. So if I click on this, you can see it just kind of silently does nothing with those labels. And that's because movie quote is nil. So, doing good, need to get past a movie quote, then we'll be all set. Getting kind of long, but we'll get there. How do you pass a movie quote? So, last thing that they stubbed out for us, Apple's like a prediction genius here, is prepare for segue. So this is in the navigation area. So this mark, by the way, it's so that it drops down and it kind of looks pretty over here. And you can read all their comments, right? So they say in a storyboard application, if you want to do a little thing just before navigation, do it here. And it's giving you advice, right? So it says you can get the new view controller by saying bracket segue destination view controller. I think this is a hysterical little typo. This is Objective-C code, right? It's like, way to go, guys. I'm sure that'll get fixed. And it says pass the selected object to the view controller. That's exactly what we're going to do, but I don't need the comments. So I'm just going to kill the comments, which is great. So prepare for segue. What do we want to do? In following with best practice, the first thing you should do is you should check the segue identifier. It turns out we only have one segue, so I know what segue identifier it is, but I like to follow best practice, so I'm going to do that. So if the segue identifier is equal to the show detail segue, then we're going to do stuff. Stuff we want to do. First, we have to get the movie quote. The challenge with doing it this way is how do we know who just got clicked? We catch a break because the table view knows who is selected. But I've got to remember how to do it. It's index path for selected row. So this is how you get the index path of the selected row. So I could just say let index path equal this thing, right? So now I've got the index path of the thing that's selected. And then if I wanted to get the movie quotes, it's just a matter of saying movie quotes at index path.row. Cool. So there I got the index path.row. You can see that it wanted it to be an optional. I don't really need an optional. I'm just going to put an exclamation point. The reason it was an optional is because this method, there may or may not be something selected. It turns out we know somebody selected because they just clicked it, so I'm just going to force unwrap it. If you'd like to be safer, though, and you remember all your Swift tricks, there was actually a whole Swift trick for this, right? And it was called optional binding. And we could do this. We could say if index path for selected row. So we're actually we're just being safer here, right? And so we're saying if it exists, like if there is a selected row, then I want a reference to it, right? And it's really kind of neat how much Apple has thought through about how you use the language and what language features they provide for you, right? Because this is perfect, because we don't want it to crash if it's not selected. So optional binding, great time for doing optional binding. All right, so now we've got a movie quote. Then we have to do something with it. The thing that we want to do with it is we want to say segue destination view controller. So this is our destination view controller. And what we want to set on him is his movie quote. What we would like to do is we'd like to say .movie quote. The problem is destination view controller doesn't know what type he is, right? So he's just an any object. So what we've got to do is we've got to say as MovieQuoteDetailViewController. If you wanted to, you could save this off as a variable, or if you wanted, you could just make a monster statement, and you could put this in parentheses, and you could say .movie quote equals movie quote. So your choice. You could do it all in one line like that, or if it really bothers you, you could say detail VC, and you could break this off in one piece, and then you could say detail VC. That wasn't a great name like that. Don't care how you do it. I'm actually in a mood to make a monster line. I don't really know why. Should work. Should work. Let's try it. So now we're passing over a movie quote. When the view appears, it puts it there. Awesome. It says, I'll be back. Terminator. If I click on this one, it says, Yo, Adrian, Rocky. Let's go ahead and make a really long quote just for fun. I just went and found one here, so it's a really long quote. You can hopefully see the whole thing. Just when I thought you couldn't possibly be, and it gets cut off here, so it's from Dumb and Dumber. So just when I thought you couldn't possibly be any dumber, you go and do something like this and totally redeem yourself, if you like that Jim Carrey movie. And we can see that our long quote system at work that expanded. We could do even more to line up this left edge. Not worried about it. And so here you can see it's our first real use of needing a detail view controller. And we can also do deletes just like we did before. Shouldn't be any problem. When you click on things, it still shows the right quote, and everything works out super-rific. All right, that's it for the detail view controller. Come back next time, and we'll add a way to where you can edit from inside the detail view controller. All right, see you then.